Welcome back to another episode of the Done Deal show. Later than usual in the week, but it's been a busy time for us all. Lots to talk about today. Mbappe's exit. Could he be on his way to Chelsea? Could he be on his way to Liverpool? Or will it be Spain where he ends up? We're talking Bukayo Saka. Chelsea seemingly interested, according to reports today. But of course, a new deal appears to be imminent at Arsenal. We're talking Harry Kane to Bayern Munich, Ronaldo's exit, and Bruno to Real Madrid, plus much more. I'm joined, as ever, by the brilliant, the sensational Ben Jacobs, who I have to say I'm very disappointed in today because he has a fairly normal jumper on. But aside from that, how are you, mate?
I don't know. It's sort of tangerine coloured. It's bright. It's another Zara concoction. People will have to score it again out of 10, and then we'll find out whether the vast majority of the chat prefer festive jumpers or plainer attire, and I can adjust my dress code per show based upon the feedback. But hey, the last jumper went down quite well, and I'm good. Thank you very much as well.
Good. Yeah, let us know, people, what you think. The more flamboyant with patterns and stripes on, or we going for the plain, bright jumpers? What we saying, people? Very intrigued to know. First big story of the day to jump into, though, kind of Tuesday, this really started to pick up pace. Kylian Mbappe seemingly wanting out, stating that promises have been broken, not happy at the club. I mean, I interpret that as pretty much a transfer request, stating that he wants to leave. It was a mistake to sign a new deal at PSG. What's the latest as far as you're aware of the situation with Mbappe, and where's he going?
Well, I think there's just drama at PSG, and it's important to note that PSG's perspective is that there's a smear campaign against them in a variety of different areas, and it's partially to do with the build-up to the World Cup and their Qatar links. But Mbappe is definitely unhappy, and there's tension between club executives, Christophe Galtier, Luis Campos, and Mbappe, because Mbappe is unhappy with his position tactically in the team. But also, I think he feels that he should have authority and control more generally as well. So if he can't even play exactly how and where he wants to, then that shows you that Galtier, as a new manager, has put his foot down and been given authority. And that, as I understand it, has bled into other areas of the club as well. So the deal that Mbappe feels he signed and the control that allegedly came with has not materialized. And to stress once again, PSG always said that was the case, that Mbappe was not a de facto leader, a de facto sporting director, or whatever you want to call it. He was always just a very well paid and valued player. And ultimately, the final say as to when he plays, where he plays, how he plays, whether he gets to take the penalties or the free kicks and so on, comes down to Christophe Galtier. But there's tension. And definitely at the Mbappe end, there is a feeling that he has made a mistake in signing a new deal with PSG. So then from PSG's perspective, they are in a win-win and lose-lose position. The win-win side is that by getting him to sign a new deal, there's no chance at any point further down the line he can leave for a free. So suddenly now the transfer fee is inflated, which means that if he stays and the situation is repaired, then PSG keep the player. And if he leaves, they'll get a lot of money for him, even more so than they would have done if Mbappe had chosen Real Madrid over last summer. And the lose-lose is the club is a little bit toxic and divided at the moment. And it's a shame almost, because Messi is settling and there's still a chance that he might stay despite the interest from Barcelona. And Neymar, who everybody thought was unhappy and wanted to leave, is on fire on the football field with goals and assists. And it's actually Mbappe that's the problem, which is not something from those three. If you were to order where the problem might arise a few months back, we wouldn't have put Mbappe as the number one problem. We'd have put Neymar as the number one solution that PSG needed to find. And then Messi's future was always and still will be uncertain until after the World Cup. But after Mbappe signed, PSG celebrated that as a victory. And now it feels like a defeat in many ways. So there's a lot of different components to this. And again, from PSG's perspective, they argue, as you would expect them to, that Mbappe has not said he is unhappy. But behind closed doors, there is tension at the moment. And there's a real chance of opportunism, therefore, for other clubs chasing. So as I understand it, talking to all sides, number one, he will not be sold in January. That's the first thing to say definitively. And barring an astronomical offer well in excess of 300 million euros, Mbappe will see out the season. and will want to as well after the World Cup, because ultimately the aim is to try and win the Champions League. And then number two, PSG will entertain offers if valuation is met in the summer. And that kind of opens the door to a number of different clubs. They really don't want to negotiate with Real Madrid, but if the right offer is made, I don't think they'll have a choice. So Real Madrid want Mbappe. We know that. They tried for him last summer. But at the moment, they've not made a move. They've not reacted to this news. And the feeling from a lot of the suitors is just to bide their time anyway until after the World Cup, because they feel that some of this messaging might be political and tactical in order to get Mbappe what he wants at PSG. But Real Madrid are certainly monitoring the situation, but they've not moved. They've not made any contact with the players' camp, and they've not spoken to PSG about whether anything might be possible either in the short or the medium term. But what's interesting is that this puts Mbappe on the radar, and he's really only affordable, if we're looking at next summer, to a very small number of clubs who are prepared to pay this astronomical fee. It might prove valuable over time. And if you can afford the outlay in a staggered payment, let's not forget, then as PSG argue, for example, with Messi, the player makes you money when all different aspects of incomings and outgoings are considered. So PSG's argument is that what they've paid Messi doesn't matter, because under financial fair play, they argue they can prove a 10 million euro profit since he's joined the club. And if that's the same for Mbappe, then it might be worth the payment, but you've still got to afford it. And PSG are not going to give you payment terms on a 250 million to 300 million transfer over, let's say, a decade or more. They're still going to want that fee within 5 to 7 years, especially because the financial market can change. So who therefore could get Mbappe? Well, ultimately it is Real Madrid, and then Barcelona might be interested in the player, but they certainly can't afford that outlay, and it wouldn't make a great deal of sense. And let's not forget, they want to bring Messi back, and that will come with high wages, even if there's not any kind of high transfer fee. So you've got Real Madrid, and then Chelsea is the really interesting one, because we know that Todd Boehly wants a marquee signing. And absolutely, if Mbappe becomes available under the right terms, at the right price, he's precisely the kind of player that Todd Boehly would like. And then we return to that interesting dynamic once again of, let's say, next summer, who has the final say over recruitment? What does Graham Potter want? Because I think Graham Potter quite likes the idea of having a dressing room that isn't dominated by one ego or star. And there are names at Chelsea, because they're a huge club, that might exert more authority. But if you look at the squad at large, a Reece James, a Mason Mount, and a Aubameyang who's just arrived, a Silva, a Cucurella, a Chilwell, a Kante who's very well paid, even though he's not playing at the moment. None of them are necessarily what you would call big egos, in the sense that they are individually controlling the dressing room or dictating they require game time. And Mbappe would fall into that category. So let's see what Graham Potter's feedback on that is. But Chelsea definitely have piqued interest following the situation. But the summary really is that there's only really Real Madrid and Chelsea that could come into the race for Mbappe and afford him. There's one or two other clubs like Liverpool that might choose to break their mold, but there's no real indication from people I talk to that Liverpool are seriously interested in Mbappe at this point. And then you would have a club like Newcastle, but I can tell you categorically that Kylian Mbappe has got zero interest in joining Newcastle. And that's no detriment on Newcastle. It's just that in making his decision, he will only join a club with, one, guaranteed Champions League football next season should he leave, but two, a club that is likely to be in the Champions League season in, season out. And Newcastle are just too formative in their very ambitious model and development to offer him that, even though financially speaking, they may well be able to afford him. So there's only a handful of clubs, and Chelsea would definitely be one of them if Mbappe becomes available on the market. But Real Madrid would always be favourites if it comes to a transfer next summer, simply because Mbappe really still would like to move to Real at some point in his career. And that's ultimately why he thinks he made a mistake, because he had the chance for that dream move and he was persuaded to stay in Paris for whatever reason. And now the tension that has materialized, probably in his mind, is going to provoke a U-turn, which will either result in a transfer next summer or very serious internal talks to quickly rectify the situation.
Yeah, So much of that makes sense, as you say, in terms of him and why he now wants to leave. And I think there is an element of his behavior that a lot of fans are a little bit worried about. I think the footage of him barging into Messi and maybe some of the terms he accepted to stay at the club seem so obscure. At the same time, I've said it for a long while now. I don't even mean it rudely about the French league. It's a good league. Lots of quality players develop there, but you're never going to get the same attention, the same eyes on you, the same viewing figures as if you were playing in the Prem or if you're playing in La Liga. The Uber Eats league, with all due respect, is a much smaller league globally, and I'm talking the amount of people watching it. And people often conflate quality of football versus the popularity of the league. When it comes to the popularity of the league, with all due respect, I think more French people watch the Premier League than watch their own league. I'd love to see the viewing figures. That's just my guess. But anyway, so I get why he wants to leave, but there's a right and a wrong way to do it. It's going to be very intriguing to see whether as you say, the English teams can move in. I see this being Real Madrid all over, if I'm being honest. I know that Chelsea may show an interest, and there could be a possibility that it's on Todd Bowley, as long as the manager signs off on it. Of course, they're going to want someone like him at the club. He's a superstar, but it just feels like it's got Real Madrid written all over it, especially with what they're trying to build there. There's no doubt, but there is a lot of money in England now, and there are a few people in the comment section saying, could you see Arsenal or Liverpool making a move for Mbappe? I mean, Liverpool, we know, have tried to sign him in the past. Could you see anybody else in the EPL outside of Chelsea looking at him?
Well, let's not forget also Chelsea almost signed Mbappe when he was very young, but they were worried about his defensive qualities, and that is a missed opportunity in hindsight. I think that the Liverpool interest is historical, and as a result, they will always be linked, but they'll kind of have to break their financial planning and mold in order to get a deal over the line. But for a player of that quality and his age, they could absolutely enter the race, but they've got some work to do in the Premier League, because once again, if they don't have Champions League football next season, they will stand zero chance of signing Kylian Mbappe come the summer. So it's all about them turning fortunes around and possibly moving in the January market in order to do that. They had a great win against Rangers, but we saw them beat Bournemouth 9-0, and then that wasn't followed up with the consistency of results. So Liverpool's a great club. It's got an excellent recruitment model. They try and keep their business very secretive. They've got a top-class manager. There's a lot to like there if you're Kylian Mbappe. So they can't be discounted, but it will be interesting to see whether or not they enter the race should Mbappe become available, because they don't tend to get drawn into bidding wars, which means that they either get very private buy-in with the player over a long period of time and then get a deal done on their terms. And we saw that with Darwin Nunez. Otherwise, they walk away. And given that Liverpool want Jude Bellingham, they're not going to get Jude Bellingham and Kylian Mbappe, financially speaking. And I think that Bellingham will be Liverpool's priority over Kylian Mbappe at this stage. Whereas from Real Madrid's point of view, let's say they got Mbappe, they also may not get Bellingham. So ironically, if Liverpool want Bellingham and so do Real, and then Real want Mbappe, if the opportunity comes to get Mbappe, you might find that that actually allows Liverpool a slightly clearer path to Bellingham, although there's so much interest in him that either way, that's going to be a very open race. Other clubs, Arsenal not in the race for Mbappe. They will not seriously entertain any kind of offer or bid for him. That one is a complete non-starter. And Newcastle, as I mentioned, is another possible destination, in the sense that PIF want a marquee signing, but it's going to be very, very difficult to persuade Kylian Mbappe to join Newcastle. And again, there's absolutely nothing in it at this stage. There's been no contact. He's not on a shortlist. He's not a player that Dan Ashworth is working on. So this is very much pie in the sky. It's very much Newcastle's ambitious ownership group saying, what about if we could get a young elite star to come and build our model around? But Newcastle would have to, first and foremost, enter the race late, because they would have to show Mbappe that they've got Champions League football. So there'll be other clubs potentially working on it sooner. And they know already that they're way down the list of destinations because of the current status of the club where Mbappe would possibly go. And again, to reiterate, because it's only fair for balance, PSG's take is that Mbappe has not said he's happy. It's to be taken, has not said he's unhappy, I should say. It's to be taken with a pinch of salt, of course. but that is their perspective. So they will cash in for the right offer, but they are not planning for an imminent sale at this stage.
Yeah, I get that totally. And they'd be very silly business-wise to say that now. You want to keep the price as high as possible. You would probably say he's not for sale up until the day that you agree to sell him, which is going to be key. And yeah, it's the money. But I think what's really interesting about the money in football is everything's seen as so high. Mbappe, he is one of Mbappe's and Haaland's, these guys. These are almost like the first breed of player who are being bought at during the peak of social media and the money that brings in. Of course, Messi and Ronaldo have the biggest followings and the money that's there. But in the early days when they were being bought by the Real Madrids or given the new deals by Barcelona's, social media was there, but it wasn't like it is now. It wasn't as monetizable. You couldn't monetize it in the same way that you can now. A player the size of Mbappe, if you structure it right, you would be able to generate a large amount of the money it costs to bring him in back in revenue, shirt sales, sponsors. There'll be sponsors falling over backwards just to sponsor you because he's there and they want Mbappe in his shirts, in their shirts, or wearing the watch, wearing the boots, whatever it may be. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be very, very intriguing to see what way this goes, and I feel like it's really set up to be the big story. Maybe along with Jude Bellingham, the big story this summer, which we can all sink our teeth into. There's a super chat kind of related to PSG here from Barbar that says, Ben, is it true that Aubameyang's camp is planning a move for PSG from all the rumors coming out? Could you clear it up? A lot of journalists are saying that he is unhappy.
Yeah, I'll come to that in a moment. Just a quick one on the point that you raised about how you balance the books with a player like Mbappe, because everyone always says, well, how are you going to afford the wages? How are you going to afford the payments? The fees astronomical. You give a young player a long-term contract and you then have your payment installments, and then under the different rules, both financial fair play and Premier League's profit and sustainability, you can offset those payments over different years on your books. So even if it's 300 million, that doesn't mean that per year you're laying out anything close to that. And some of that might also be add-ons that are either unattainable, so you're never really going to have to pay them, or if they are attainable, they're tied to success, which means you've also got more money coming in, so the player's proven his worth. Shirt sales, actually, it's a bit of a myth, don't tend to make that much money for the football club. Of course, they have an impact, but it's a tiny amount of incomings compared to other things. So where the club make money, and Real and Barca are very good at this, and other clubs are kind of catching up, is when the player signs, you try and negotiate with them to take a cut of their personal commercial growth. So with Gareth Bale, for example, when he joined Real Madrid, Real said, we think we're bigger than you as a brand. You're going to be doing your Hearts trademark celebration. You're going to be using that for personal marketing. You're going to be pictured in a Real Madrid shirt. You're going to be referred to as a Real Madrid player. This is when he first joined. We're taking a cut of that. So then as the player grows as an individual brand, the club gets to cash in and take a percentage back of that. It's almost like freelancing in the sense that if you're working for one employer and off you go and do something else on behalf of that employer, the employer may say, well, you're benefiting, but you work for us. We could very much say you can't do anything, but we're going to let you do something and we want a percentage of it. And increasingly clubs are making money out of that as well. And then you've got all of the different aspects on top of that, where, as you say, you can bring on board a new sponsor, you can do player activations, you can go to new territories and regions, and that all helps pull the money in. So that ultimately is how they can balance the books. And then coming back to the question about Aubameyang, I think that is too early to say he's unhappy, but unsettled might be a better way of putting it. And by that, I mean, Chelsea signed Aubameyang because Thomas Tuchel wanted him, and there was an existing relationship, obviously, between those two. And at the time Aubameyang chose to leave, he had no idea that Thomas Tuchel was basically already outgoing. And that's the one strange thing about Chelsea's window, that they knew Thomas Tuchel was going weeks before they eventually sacked him. And that's why they were able to bring in Graham Potter so quickly. So on the final day of the window, to get Aubameyang done, I think he just felt like, wow, I didn't know about that And nor did Tuchel, in fairness. He didn't see it coming that quickly, but there's a lot of change. And he perhaps wondered where his place would be in the side in the short and the long term immediately, because he'd lost that ally in Thomas Tuchel. And then when you look at Broja, and Potter may well give him more minutes, and Havertz and Sterling, and the fact that there's already talk that Nkunku is going to be coming in next summer, and Chelsea are looking at Leao, and suddenly Mbappe is vaguely in the mix. I think Aubameyang just feels, because of his age, that he's going to be more and more down the pecking order. And because he was quite happy at Barcelona and hadn't been there for that long, and Xavi basically said to him, listen, if the opportunity is right for you, you can go, but don't feel obliged to exit. We don't need to sell you for our finances, because they knew at that point that they were not going to get Bernardo Silva. So Xavi said, I like Aubameyang, I'll play Aubameyang, I'll use Aubameyang. But Aubameyang said, Tuchel wants me, I'd like to go back to London and the Premier League. And now he feels like within days it's all changed. And it's not just him. Look at Levi Colwill. Billy Gilmore's a great example as well. Both players end up moving because they get told Graham Potter's great. And from Colwell's perspective, he's only on loan. But Gilmore's like, I'm going to take a permanent deal because Graham Potter's right for my career. And then just days later, Potter ends up at Chelsea. And Gilmore must be thinking, why did someone at Chelsea not tell me that Potter was likely to become incoming, because he might have only agreed to a loan deal. So there's all of that. And then with PSG and Aubameyang, there's nothing in it. So PSG have completely denied any approach, any interest. It's not within their strategy. They're looking to buy younger and actually preferably French talent if they can. But Aubameyang is not some stopgap striker. Yep, they've done it in the past. They've brought in, say, Cavani, who did very well for them. They've not been afraid, Ibrahimovic, to invest in slightly older players that have got proven and clinical track record. But Aubameyang to PSG will not happen. And it's too early to judge whether Aubameyang is desperately looking to force his way out. I mean, you know, he was playing Champions League. He was scoring Champions League. He's doing his somersault at the age of 33 in the San Siro. And that's all a confidence boost to suggest that he's got a future and game time and start time at Chelsea. So I think that the good thing about Graham Potter and his personality is that he gives everyone a fair chance. He doesn't look based on age. He doesn't look based on history. He's had one-on-one conversations with all of his players, whether they've been at the club for a while, whether they're brand new signings, and he will judge that chemistry and dynamic. He will not come in and give any sort of pre-existing loyalty. He will not come in and fulfill someone else's promises or whatever Thomas Tuchel had said to Aubameyang. So that can be uncertain. Look at Mendy, and now Kepa has kind of moved ahead of him. So it can be unsettling for every player, but that is also the beauty of a new manager, that everyone gets a fair chance. And from what I understand, Aubameyang realizes he is going to get game time, is now scoring, and wants to fight for his place. But I can categorically say at this stage, there's nothing in this Aubameyang to PSG link. There's been no talks between the clubs, and there's been no reach out to Aubameyang's representatives from PSG. He is not at this stage, at the time of recording, on their radar, contrary to some reports that we've seen in France.
Thank you very much for that update. It means a lot to us. Any other questions you guys have got, feel free to send them in. Of course, member chats, super chats will take priority as you keep the terrace going. So a big thank you to everyone that's done that. There was, in response to talking about the endorsements and money prior, there was a few people saying things like buying merch doesn't matter. Well, it does, because they always link it back to what I say about not. Everyone knows, I think, if you stop buying merchandise for Man United, it helps get the Glazers out. People always miss the point I make. It's not getting the Glazers out is not about even the direct money that we make the club. It's about the impact on the share price and the value of the club. As confirmed by the Rain Group, they are not selling because they feel like the valuation is going to continue rising. And we all know if fans boycott, that damages valuation, that damages share price. So, but someone else said that sounds like extortion. It's not extortion. I'll give you an example. If somebody's becoming really popular and famous because they're on a YouTube channel, let's just say I didn't have my own YouTube channel and I was continually, and I only featured on the United Stand, biggest Man United channel in the world. And I was suddenly becoming popular, and little catchphrases that I use, people were loving it. And I was becoming famous from it, and I was trying to sell those products. But people only saw me on the United Stand. Mark Goldbridge would have every right to say, cool, but I want a kickback, because if I stop you from being on my channel, no one knows who you are. And that's fair. And like, footballers are only as big as the clubs they play for, because if Gareth Bale left Real Madrid and didn't sign for anybody else, him doing the heart sign, nobody would see it because they wouldn't be watching the football matches. So it's not extortion, it's called business. And it's absolutely fair. It's a little bit of a I scratch your back, you scratch mine, essentially. But there we go. Comment here from Nav says, I'm sorry, I don't believe he will come to us. I want a striker that can bang in 30, 40 yards in 3 or 4 games at a time, like Haaland. To me, Mbappe is a 2-yard tap-in merchant, and people think that's world class. Thank you, Nav. He says, I'm not being funny. I'm not being funny. When I show people I would prefer Haaland over Mbappe, because I know I would. Terry, you wouldn't. Sorry, you would. Let's be real here. Haaland's proven in the Premier League. Mbappe won't. I don't think. Honestly, Geezer is overrated. Listen, I think Mbappe is brilliant. Everyone knows how much I like Haaland, though. Different type of players, though, and I don't think you could sign Mbappe to do the Haaland role. They don't play in the same position. They don't play in the same way. But I do think Mbappe, listen, I think he will do well in La Liga. I think he'll do well, brilliantly, in fact, in La Liga, and brilliantly in the Premier League. I just want to see it happen by him leaving League A. So thank you. Nav again with another one saying, I would prefer Haaland over Mbappe. I mentioned at the start. Sorry to keep guessing auto-typed. Not a problem. I got your message, and I really appreciate the super chats, Nav. I really, really do. I got what you meant. Sometimes the auto chats are hard because I don't know whether it's the writing or my dyslexia. And I'm like, all right, am I reading this right? Am I getting it wrong? But there we go.
Got to be honest, though, to call Mbappe a tap-in merchant, respect everyone's opinion, obviously, but let's not caricature these elite level players. Mbappe walks into any team in the world, in any league in the world, and at the moment it's exactly the same for Haaland. So it's true that different teams with different tactics and different styles require different players. Thierry Henry put it best and said each football team is almost like a film, and every film has a different genre, so requires a different actor. So if you take Lewandowski out of Barcelona and put him into Manchester City, if you take Haaland out of Manchester City and put him into Barcelona, they're in different, in inverted commas, films. And can they act the same? And that's really important, because in this day and age of championship manager, football manager, and stats, we look at a lot of things like FIFA cards, we gamify, we caricature, and that removes the finesse of the reality, which is not what are their stats like, which is not just what are their personal skills like, but it's also how do they complement the rest of their team? How do they fit into a certain style and system? And undoubtedly, Haaland is on fire at the moment because he's just surrounded by quality. And Foden is on fire at the moment because people are more drawn towards Haaland. And that in turn also helps De Bruyne. So suddenly there's threats everywhere and everyone's benefiting. And the quality of build-up and movement is all kind of tied together. And Manchester City are just clicking or purring at the moment. But I think when people look at a player that largely hovers around the box, scores goals from close range, and Gary Lineker did it, and Haaland does it, they sometimes demean them. They sometimes say they're a tap-in merchant. And I just think that's not helpful, because what it does is it demeans and it reduces the actual quality and the team aspect that we are seeing. So, of course, if you're comparing the two, you can make a joke, you can make a jibe, you can prefer one player over the other, but make absolutely no mistake. Kylian Mbappe is an automatic starter in every single football team in the world right now.
I agree, but this is what's done to, Nav's a great guy, great supporter of the terrace, but a lot of the times, and Nav doesn't tend to have agendas, okay? So he's giving an opinion, but a lot of people do. Last night I saw people saying about Bruno Fernandes, see, without GA, he's nothing. No GA again. I'm like, did you see the 2 clear-cut chances that players missed that they should have scored? If they scored, then he has 2 assists. It's almost 1 minute you're judging him and saying, well, if he doesn't get assists, he doesn't do anything. Last night he created so many opportunities, but his teammates didn't finish them, and yet you're saying he's bad. Like, this is why, although Trent and KDB get lots of assists, that's only because the players they're passing to are good at finishing. KDB wouldn't have half the assists if he was crossing that ball into Ollie Watkins because he would miss a lot of those chances and opportunities. So I think there's lots of things that need to be considered there. But viewers, make sure you're smashing the like button for me and subscribing to The Terrace this morning. Next subject I want to speak to you about, Harry Kane. Again, linked, we've got a poll running as it stands right now. And the question was, should Harry Kane leave Tottenham for Bayern? 88% of the vote says yes, and he should leave ASAP. 7% says never. And 6% say give Conte 2 seasons. That's including this year. But again, I keep seeing the rumors. What's the latest with Harry Kane? And whether he's thinking of leaving, are Bayern Munich, in your opinion, likely to make an attempt to sign him this summer?
Well, we know that Bayern Munich like Kane. They said that last summer, but liking Kane and getting Kane are 2 completely different things. So Tottenham are really very calm about the situation. And if anything, it might be a Premier League rival that is more of a threat than Bayern, because sources continue to tell me close to Harry Kane that he's not necessarily sold on the Bundesliga, but what he wants to do is make a serious challenge to win the Champions League and do that across multiple seasons, as opposed to just one-offs or qualify, don't qualify. So if Tottenham move in the right direction and he sees the project under Conte as evolving, and to a large extent it is at the moment, I think that they've added a lot of depth. They've been a little bit wobbly in the Champions League, but they still have turned that around. And other than the North London derby, from a Premier League point of view, they're exactly where I think they would hope to be. Because Tottenham have always been a team that have hovered around the top 6 and have made pushes for the Champions League. And even in the seasons where they've been more within the top 4, those have often seen them fall at the last hurdle. And most notably, that was the case when Leicester won the Premier League in 2015, 2016. But now they find themselves with 6 wins, 2 draws, and just that North London derby loss. They're scoring goals. They're not conceding too many. They're just about keeping pace still with Arsenal and Manchester City. And they'll obviously have to play those teams, so be able to claw back some points. But most importantly, they are building a mini cushion, which shouldn't sound like a big deal at this stage of the season. But to be third in the table on 20 points and have a 4-point cushion over Chelsea, albeit Chelsea have got a game in hand, and a 5-point cushion over Manchester United, it just means if they can now finish strongly over the course of the next few weeks before the World Cup break, they'll be in an excellent position, which will benefit their January window. But then coming back to Kane will convince Kane that they are on track for Champions League again. And Tottenham are calm about it because they believe that Kane will sign a new deal. Kane's going to bide his time, because if he makes up his mind now, unless there's a clause that allows him to go in the summer still, or a gentleman's agreement, he might find that everything looks rosy and then Spurs have a wobble and then they finish in 5th place and he's back where he started. He's unhappy, but he's tied himself in. So you can understand why Harry Kane wants to get the World Cup out the way, not just because of the World Cup, but because he wants to see over the next few weeks and even few months exactly where Spurs are heading. And Kane has told the Spurs hierarchy already, as I understand it, that if Spurs get back-to-back Champions League qualifications, he becomes invested in the project for the long term, because he believes that that money and that investment will lead towards Tottenham being a regular Champions League fixture. And then there's absolutely no reason for him to leave. But if Spurs, having taken a step forwards and spent a lot of money over the summer, then end up 2 steps back and outside of the top 4, at that point, Kane will be lured away. And we know that there was the interest a few seasons back by Manchester City. Chelsea are the more likely threat coming from the Premier League at the moment. They will look at Harry Kane for sure. Todd Boehly in particular is very keen on showing that Chelsea can bring in proven Premier League players, particularly attack-minded players. So Leao and Nkunku, even Mbappe, these are all players that are young, and Chelsea feel they can build a core around and buy them at, in inverted commas, value. Transfer fees are still high, but they'll be classified at Chelsea's end as value. But they want also 1 or 2 players, which is why they went for Rafinha as well, which is why they tried to hijack the Jesus and Richarlison deals at the last minute. They want a kind of marquee name from within the Premier League as well, not to show they can nab somebody from their rivals, but to bring in someone that can immediately hit the ground running. Because look at Gabriel Jesus and how beneficial that's been to Arsenal. And usually a player that doesn't come from the Premier League needs a season or two to really hit their peak. Yeah. Whereas Jesus has just been able to transition instantly. Kane would be able to just transition instantly. So Haaland's kind of the exception. But let's see how, for example, Darwin Núñez does at Liverpool and whether he needs a season or two before he really gets going. Yeah. And on current evidence, that looks like being the case. Isaac at Newcastle, he's younger, slightly different example, but he might need a little bit of time as well. So Harry Kane won't rush into making a decision, but Tottenham are calm because they believe if the Conte development continues and they stay within the top four, then somewhere along the line towards the end of this year or the beginning of next year, they will be able to make progress with Kane and get him to extend. There may be caveats, there may be outs for Kane with protected value from Tottenham's point of view, but basically, as long as Tottenham continue to stay in the top four, they have full belief that Kane is not going to jump ship. The problem is going to start if Tottenham fall out of the top four mid-season, fall too far behind, or obviously come the end of the season, don't qualify for Champions League. And the bigger cushion they build earlier in the season, the earlier it becomes likely that Kane will extend.
And I totally get that. I think what's really intriguing when you say at the start of that around Harry Kane is more likely to join a rival in the Prem than Bayern Munich is key. As you say, it all depends on the direction, because you probably we all know he isn't going City because they have Haaland. So that's a write-off straight away. There is talk. You've always got Chelsea as an option, but the thought is that Spurs would never do business with Chelsea. So it almost rules things out. You then think Liverpool. Depends. You've mentioned it in the show already. If Liverpool don't make the Champions League, getting Bellingham very hard, Mbappe impossible. And if Kane's only reason for leaving is to try and win the Premier League or the Champions League, the team isn't in the Champions League, that rules them out. And I suppose then you've got Manchester United. Where will Man United be at the end of the season? Will they be in the top four? Will the football be looking good enough for Harry Kane to think, well, I can't go to because he's not going to Arsenal either, by the way. I mean, that he's not doing a Sol Campbell. So it's very, as you say, it's going to be very, very intriguing to see what happens with Harry Kane. And I mean, I've been called out. There's a Spurs channel that's done a video on its own platform asking everyone to block the football terrace because they believe that I hate Spurs. And I think it's for the opinion that I'm about to repeat for maybe the 20th time in my life, that the reason I want Harry Kane to leave Tottenham isn't because I dislike Tottenham. It isn't because I'm scared of Tottenham and I want to weaken them. It's because I believe a player of Harry Kane's ability deserves those trophies, or I want to see him win those trophies rather than deserve to have them, because I have a belief that to be a true legend of the game, you have to win major titles. I can't think of a footballer who is looked at as a great that has the goal scoring record of a Harry Kane that doesn't have major league titles, Champions League titles, or won a World Cup. Like a combination of those things or all of them. Does that make sense? And this is my view of Harry Kane. Spurs fans, he's always going to be a legend. So I'm not talking to Spurs fans. I'm talking the world of football. He wants to be a football legend. He can't be the only one in the history of the game to not win anything and be in that group of players. I actually find it unfair on those other individuals. So it's a very interesting time for Harry Kane and what happens with him and progression at Tottenham. If Tottenham do very well this year and they look like they can go on to win things, then I think he'll stay. But if they do fade away, if there is a falling out with the manager, they tell Conte they're not going to invest it. You know, these things can happen at Tottenham. They've happened before. Very, very intriguing to see what direction this goes in. But
all I'd say, Terry, briefly on that is I think you're right in retrospect, but ultimately the thing with Harry Kane is that he is not in that same category as, let's say, Haaland and Mbappe age-wise. So as a 29-year-old, it, to me, is a bit more arbitrary and personal rather than reputational. And by that, I just mean that you're absolutely right in what you say, that players in retrospect will also be judged on what they want. But because Kane's 29, it's all about whether he arbitrarily, for example, wants to go to the Bundesliga and in all likelihood parade to a league title so he can say, I won a league title. And if that's his desire, and the same for a move to a Premier League club, then he gets a medal in the slightly later part of his career. But if we're judging him just on talent and goal scoring numbers, he's up there with a number of elite level players already. And I think that people appreciate that. And let's not forget as well that with Spurs, he got to a Champions League final in 2018, 2019, where he was the runner-up. He's got to a European Championship final with England, where he was a runner-up. And of course, that isn't a winner's medal, but it does show you that in relatively recent history, he has been able to get to significant major finals. And obviously with Tottenham as well in the EFL Cup, he was a runner-up in 14-15 and 2021 as well. So these are near misses, and some would argue that the Premier League in 15-16, which Leicester ended up winning, was also a near miss, because for much parts of that season, Spurs were very much on course. So I think it's just interesting because he's 29, and that's the thing to remember, that he's done enough already, even at Spurs, to show he is an elite level player for club and country. But because he's 29, do you almost factor into your selection, where can I go to just get a medal? And that's the irony, that if you pick Chelsea, then you might get a medal, but you might go there for 2 seasons and finish third, be another runner-up in a Champions League final, and then get into your early 30s with nothing. Whereas if you go to Bayern, and who knows, this could factor into his thinking. It's not my understanding at the moment that he's seriously considering the Bundesliga. But if you go to PSG or Bayern, then are you going to win something? Absolutely, 100% you're going to win something. So who knows, that might be factored in. And I don't think that's because he wants to prove a point to be like, oh, finally now I'll be remembered as a winner. Because I think he'll be remembered as a quality player regardless. But it's more a personal level. Does he want to put something in his own personal cabinet and have that bus parade and have that party and have that medal around his neck? And who knows, the answer to that could be yes.
I totally, I mean, we kind of know to a degree he does, because he nearly left Tottenham for those very reasons. But I think with Harry Kane, for me, it's always a case of, he'll have his own motivations. And if his motivation is, I want to be the greatest Spurs player of all time, then fair enough. I won't condemn him for that. But equally, for me, just in my opinion in football, when you think of the greatest players in their moments, the majority of their moments, unless they've done something crazy like kick a racist fan at Crystal Palace, big up my legend Eric Cantona. He also did great things in the Prem. Most of their great moments are goals or match-winning moments that led to winning trophies or directly won a trophy in like a final. And I'm just saying, I want Harry Kane to have that. I want him to be, he may not get an Aguero moment, but I'd love to see Harry Kane score the winning goal in an FA Cup final. I'd love to see him score 2 or 3 goals in pivotal games in a title race that leads his team winning a Premier League, because all the greats, people love to say Shearer didn't win nothing at Newcastle, but if you remember his season at Blackburn, he did a lot of great things that year that live on forever with a certain generation. But we'll see what happens. Viewers, you can still vote on that poll that we've got running right now. Get those votes in as ever. Please make sure you're smashing like and share buttons. I wanted to ask about Bukayo Saka, because we know there's a new deal that's brewing for him, a massive new deal that's supposedly been put on the table. Reports this morning from some Chelsea sources that Todd Bowley and Chelsea are monitoring that situation, which I'm not surprised by, because Bukayo Saka is brilliant. What is the latest with him? We obviously know he's going to try and sign a new deal, but could Chelsea pounce if anything goes wrong?
No, I don't think Chelsea can stop this. I think, if anything, they're being used as leverage as the final points are ironed out around this deal. So Saka is untouchable. Arsenal are not going to sell him in the short term to a Premier League rival. And the player really enjoys working with Arteta, is in excellent form. But as importantly, after the penalty miss and the whole fallout that led to horrible abuse and personal attacks on him, he was really kind of impressed and heart-warmed by the Arsenal family and the way in which they picked him up. And I think that he was lacking a bit of confidence. He was a little bit mentally fragile off the field, I mean, because of everything that had happened. And Arsenal just really went above and beyond, from what I gather, including Mikel Arteta personally, to build back up his confidence. And now he couldn't be in a better place in terms of his football, in terms of his confidence, in terms of his happiness. And he is absolutely intent on staying once all the terms are thrashed out. And Arsenal are not going to allow another club to jump in here from the Premier League. That's not to say that Chelsea are not interested. That's not to say that Chelsea might not try their luck, but that's kind of good for Saka because it can inflate the terms that he gets. So as things currently stand, the framework, if you like, of a contract is there. And it's going to be about 5 years, and he's going to be on, roughly speaking, 200k a week. And that's where there's opportunism for Chelsea, because Chelsea, as they look to clear out players, particularly like N'Golo Kante, who unfortunately is injured again, he's one of the highest earners. Chelsea would be prepared to offer more wages than 200k a week. And that perhaps is where these stories are coming from. That perhaps is where the leverage is coming from. And Chelsea absolutely like Saka, but he's not front of queue because he's not as realistic as other targets that Chelsea are also pursuing at the same time. But what we know is that Todd Boehly wants the youngest and the best players. And as I said before, Todd Boehly also wants players with proven Premier League experience that can slot straight in. And when we talk about buying young, it's not always about for the future. You do get cases where you can buy young and they're for the present. And usually they're elite level players, and Saka is moving in that direction. Arsenal fans would probably argue he's already there, but by elite, I mean world-class elite, not Premier League elite, not improving elite, but consistent elite over a number of seasons. And give Saka a season or two, and I'm absolutely sure he'll be there, and Arsenal know this. So if they do get any significant rivals come in, then Arsenal will very much be billing Saka as untouchable. They're extremely confident that this contract renewal, which will be 5 years, will have no hitches. And the other thing to point out, which I think often gets underreported, is that when Chelsea are interested, that doesn't mean it's for now, because clubs work multiple windows ahead. So why do you express an interest now when you know that a contract is close to Arsenal? You do that either because obviously you're seriously interested and you're trying to hijack it. That's one possibility. But the other possibility, which is more likely, is that you are trying to influence the contract negotiations from the outside. And by that, I mean, if Saka's people know Chelsea want him in a year or two, and it could be the same for Haaland and Real Madrid, then when you negotiate the 5-year deal, does that mean that you put in an exit clause? Does that mean there's a gentleman's agreement? Does that mean there's if we don't qualify for the Champions League, then you have to listen to offers? And all of these things at the Saka representative end can be factored in. And if those clauses or those agreements are not added, then it's at the expense of something else. So it might be, okay, you don't want to allow me to leave within a year or more of my 5-year deal if we don't qualify for the Champions League. So therefore, you've got to pay me 50k more a week as compensation for that, and then you'll get my loyalty. Yeah. So this is what the leverage is. And the leverage isn't only agents trumping up interest that isn't there to get their client a better deal. The leverage is also a club that genuinely wants the player but can't get them now, trying to kind of stick their oar in from the outside in to influence things to make sure that they do have the clearest possible path to the player further down the line. And that might well be at stake here. But from Arsenal's perspective, they see Saka as untouchable. They're absolutely convinced that imminently he will sign a new deal. And from Chelsea's point of view, they really like the player, but not front and centre at the moment in terms of their short-term priorities, but very much on their long-term radar.
Makes perfect sense. Quick update, a quick question here from Mash, who says Saliba and Martinelli deals as well. I assume they're in very similar situations as well to Saka.
Yeah, very similar, particularly with Martinelli. Again, the Chelsea interest is there, but there's a number of clubs. But Martinelli, as has now been said, I believe on record, very keen to stay and extend at Arsenal. Saliba is the most complicated of the three, really. I think, again, if you talk to Arsenal sources, they fully expect all three to be done because of the direction they're heading in. And at the moment, why would you leave Arsenal? They're absolutely flying. But with Saliba, it's a little bit different because he's gone from a loan spell at Marseille to feeling like Marseille might make an offer, to Marseille losing the manager at the time under quite a cloud because Marseille qualified for the Champions League. And at that point, there was real tension at the club because they didn't do enough to make a serious offer for Saliba. I don't think Arsenal would have accepted it, but that was the Marseille take. And then he comes back to Arsenal and he doesn't really know what the game time is. He doesn't really know what the pathway is. And he's just had a really good season at Marseille. And then suddenly Arteta holds talks with him, puts him into the first team, and he's been brilliant. He's been outstanding. He's an automatic starter at the moment. So everything in that respect is progressing towards Saliba saying, brilliant. It looks like the long-term future is at Arsenal. But compared to Martinelli and compared to Saka, he's only been back at the club still for a few months. And he's still kind of coming to terms with that new dressing room and also a lot of voices in his ear. It's not just Marseille, it's PSG saying, well, if you're that uncertain, if you weren't sure about Arsenal, we can potentially bring you in. PSG failed to get Skriniar in the last window, and they are definitely still looking for defenders. So there's just a lot more voices in Saliba's ear. I still see no reason why he would want a move away from Arsenal. But the only caveat there is that he loved specifically being in France, which means that if PSG did come in longer down the line, it might give him a decision to make. And I don't want to position that as saying that it's doubtful he'll sign, because that's nonsense. It is still highly likely that Saliba signs. My point is just that if you score the three, Saka's untouchable. Martinelli is very, very likely, with no real panic or doubt at Arsenal's end. And then from Saliba's point of view, they again have confidence, but there is just a lot more concrete interest circling around Saliba. And the reason for that is because there's still spillover from the summer when his future was completely uncertain. And before he moved back to Arsenal, there were lots of clubs looking, actively looking. And now those clubs have only seen Saliba go from strength to strength to strength, which means they may see a window of opportunity in January. But if Saliba leaves, it will be no reflection on Arsenal. It will be because he'd already made up his mind, really, despite how well he's playing, that his long-term desire is to go back to France, which would lend itself towards, say, a PSG move. But I think because he's just come straight back in as a starter, and he's playing so well, and Arteta again has been so key in actually energizing him and making him feel immediately integrated, and keyword here, integral. That again is why I just think that it doesn't seem that likely at this point that Saliba would give all of that up. So Arsenal, if you talk to them, think they're going to get a 3 for 3 here. And as I say, my only point is if you had to score them, all highly likely, but you'd say Saka almost certain, Martinelli is heading in a direction of virtually certain, and high probability for Saliba.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got some super chats before we move on, people. If Kane joins City and they maintain their winning ways, like Grealish, does he become a great? It's really important to remember, not everyone that wins trophies is a great. If Harry Kane goes to City and flops and they win trophies, then no, because he won't be part of it. But it's whether you think he'll flop or not. It's never a sweeping statement. If Haaland went to City this year, scored 3 goals, and they won the Premier League, would he be accountable? No. I think the greatness comes from having great moments in seasons and in times where you win those trophies, and you couple in the goals. Harry Kane's goal ratio is at a great level, but I just feel like he needs the other elements there. But it's a great question. Thank you very much. Listen, if he can do at Chelsea, in my opinion, will change. Mbappe will change. I'll be fair, but to me, it's easy to be in the World Cup world class in a dead league. If he does it in the Premier League, fair enough, is what Nav says there. Trust me when I say we won't get Mbappe. It's just loud news that came from somewhere, and a journalist picked it up and passed it on. That's my thoughts. I don't think if you listen to what Ben has said in the show, it's sort of like Todd Bowley would be interested, but that's where it stands as of right now. And Barbar here says, Ben, is there a reason that Sakaria has had 0 minutes since he's joined from Juventus? Is there any reason for that?
Yeah, very similar to Melo at Liverpool in the sense that when you get a deadline day signing, it doesn't always work. And Zakaria is actually, in my opinion anyway, a very, very good player. But when judging that very, very good player, we have to go back to his Borussia Mönchengladbach days. Hadn't really found a way to find the same level of form at Juventus, albeit only got a handful of games in Serie A in 2021-22. I think he only played 9 times. But if you go back particularly to 2020-2021 and 2019-2020 at Borussia Mönchengladbach, you see what the player is capable of. So you can understand why Chelsea, given he's only 25, made a move, but certainly not top of their list on deadline day. Let's not forget they wanted Edson Alvarez. Edson Alvarez at Ajax tried to force the move by not showing up for training on deadline day. And then the Ajax board said no. And then Chelsea kind of had to scramble at the 11th hour and they turned to Zakaria. Very much a low risk signing. And with it only being a loan deal, I think like Melo, there's always been a feeling at Chelsea that Zakaria has come in for depth, but hasn't really got up to speed, hasn't really bedded in yet. There's been a lot of change at Chelsea and was brought in really if and when needed. And I think that's just because Kante injured, Kovacic only just back, and Jorginho even has had some problems in the past. So that midfield is not only aging, but due to injuries needed strengthening. And that's why they brought the player in. But at the moment, just not needed. And there's not that much, I think, that he can do to force his way into the side at the moment, especially because the midfielders that are being used and chosen are not necessarily out and out defensive midfielders that just hold. There's kind of spots there. We're seeing, say, like a Conor Gallagher come on or play to give a more attack-minded option. And I think Graham Potter's just happy with what he's got at the moment, even with Kante injured. So that's why he's not playing. It's not to say that he won't be valued or that he doesn't have a longer-term chance to force his way and get some game time, either due to injuries or just getting up to speed, both tactically and in terms of his fitness. But unfortunately, Chelsea have just inherited a player with a lot of potential, but not much confidence. And it's going to take him a little bit of time, I think, to gel and force his way into the team. And that's why he's not been factored in. And sadly, from a loanee's perspective, signed on deadline day, you can make that move. You can not get the game time and you can get sent back. And that might be what happens in this instance.
There we go. I know we're right near the end of the show, but I just want to get some quick updates on Ronaldo and Bruno, the sort of situations there.
Yeah, so the Bruno we're talking about first is the Bruno at Newcastle, who has been excellent over the course of the last few weeks, but really dating all the way back to last season. And he's arguably one of Newcastle's greatest ever midfielders. You can make a whole list, I suppose, and it depends what position we're talking about in midfield. Some, I'm sure if you're a Newcastle fan listening, would say Cabaye should be in there. Others would talk about Rob Lee or even a David Batty potentially. And then if we're talking about broader midfielders, you could even say Ginola, even though he didn't play that many games for Newcastle comparative to, say, a Rob Lee. But Bruno's up there. He's a cult figure. He's scoring goals. He wears his heart on his sleeve. And Newcastle's aim is basically to offer him a new deal. But there is some interest from Real Madrid. And when Newcastle have been asked about Bruno, they're adamant that the player will sign a new long-term contract and is happy with the project and is loving life in the Northeast. But if you talk to Real Madrid, or even when Bruno's been asked directly, he's not denied it. He's just said he's flattered by the interest. So I think that Newcastle will want to get a new deal tied down for Bruno sooner rather than later. Not because it stops Real Madrid coming in, but because it protects the sale value. But Bruno is one of the red hot players at the moment in the Premier League. And as I say, the latest is that Newcastle believe that they can get him to sign a new deal sooner rather than later. And then with Ronaldo, it's just really interesting because things have completely U-turned now. And at the beginning of the summer, it was Manchester United adamant he wasn't for sale, and it was Ronaldo desperate for a move. And even though Ronaldo is not starting any of the big games at the moment, things are calmer, as I understand it, at the Ronaldo end, but they're much more volatile at the Ten Hag side. So Manchester United would like Ronaldo to leave, and Cristiano Ronaldo is much more settled. And I think he has to be, because he can't do anything between now and the World Cup. So contrary to reports, which I understand are incorrect, that Ronaldo's moaning about Ten Hag's training methods. He did, by the way, when he first came back, because the players were getting given things like punishment laps. But things have settled and calmed now. And Ronaldo, from what I understand, is training professionally and is a much more positive influence on the dressing room, and isn't really, even if Mendes is asking around, looking to force an exit in January at the moment, because he has to just focus on game time, because he needs some momentum and some minutes ahead of the World Cup. And then after the World Cup, let's see if things pivot once again. Yeah. But the fact that he missed chances against Ammonia across 2 games and failed to score against the Cypriot side, that's not great if you want a January move to a team in or challenging for the Champions League, looking ahead to the 2023-2024 season, because unless he's scoring goals because of his wages, he is not going to attract an elite level team. Or if he does, they're going to be pitching exactly the same as Manchester United, that you're coming in to be a bit part player. So then Ronaldo may want Champions League, but he'll be on the bench for a Champions League game, because based on his current form and based on his age, even if Chelsea come in for him now, he doesn't walk into that side. He's not in a good enough form. He doesn't go to a Bayern Munich and start or score a ton of goals. So Ronaldo has to show, and I think he accepts this from what I understand, that for Manchester United between now and the World Cup, and during the World Cup, if he doesn't get enough opportunities at Manchester United, he's still got it. I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, because of course he's a world-class player, he's a GOAT, he's an elite level player, but everyone hits a period where they ever so slightly pass their peak and then the decline starts. Even Jamie Vardy has it at my club, Leicester. So I have got complete respect for Ronaldo, his talent, his ability, and he can still score goals. Let's not forget, he got 20 plus last season. But if he wants an elite level move, i.e. a step up from the current Manchester United, then he has to show at his age that on the football field, he is still value for money, because of the circus, effectively, both good and bad, that he brings to any club he joins. So it's a really important time for Ronaldo, and things have changed, because as I understand it again, Ronaldo's sole focus is to prove a point at Manchester United and to prove a point at the World Cup. And if in doing that he succeeds, then Manchester United's position may change, because they may suddenly realize Ronaldo's flying, they're flying, he's had a good World Cup. If they're on course for the Champions League, he's wasting his time looking for a move away. He may as well extend and have Champions League at Old Trafford, because he still loves that football club. So I think the only way, perversely, that Manchester United can get their wish if Ten Hag wants him out is by not playing him, and almost by driving him out of the club, by starving him of minutes. And this is what annoyed Ronaldo about the Manchester derby, that, to my point about Ronaldo being desperate for minutes, desperate to prove himself, desperate to show he's committed to Manchester United Football Club still, regardless of if he leaves or not in January, to not get those minutes in effectively a dead rubber half, and then to be told it was to protect his, quote, big career, really irritated Ronaldo. So I would classify the latest with Ronaldo as still a tense relationship between Ten Hag and Ronaldo, but a change in the power dynamic, where Ten Hag isn't looking to pander to Ronaldo to keep him. Ten Hag is saying, I'm doing it my way, it's a new era, and you will respect that. And then Ronaldo saying, listen, I do respect that, and I want to fight for my place in this football team. And then at the back of Ronaldo's mind, he's like, I'll prove the manager wrong. And then I'll either leave on my terms and on form, or I'll prove the manager wrong, and then Manchester United win from that. So Ronaldo's in a much more fluid position. He's not thinking about a January move away. Even if that ends up happening, he's thinking about finding his form ahead of the World Cup for both club and country.
Yeah, listen, I get where you're coming from. It's going to be a really interesting dynamic to kind of look at moving forward. I just got a tweet while you were talking. Actually, sorry, I just took my eye down to Sammy McBell was just revealed that it looks like 6 to 8 weeks Reece James is going to be out for, which would essentially rule him out of the World Cup. Well, we'll rule him out of the World Cup if it's 8 weeks from this point. So yeah, he won't be fit for that according to these reports. So more to come on that a little bit later in the show. Ben, always a pleasure to speak. Always a pleasure to be fully updated on what's going on. Viewers, before you leave, hit like and share buttons. Make sure you're subscribing to the Football Terrace as well. Until next time, take care. Goodbye. God bless. And we'll see you all again very, very soon. Thank you.